My name is Andy Christoph, and this is Pathbend, your guide to personal growth and healing, blending science, art, and spirit. Today's topic is the hidden games that shape our lives, where they come from, how they work, and most importantly, how to recognize them and stop playing. Have you ever noticed yourself falling into the same relationship patterns over and over? You tell yourself, this time it'll be different. I finally learned my lesson. But somehow the same conflicts, frustrations, and disappointments keep happening, like clockwork. What if I told you that these frustrating behaviors, especially the ones that feel impossible to break, are probably a part of structured psychological games? These games have hidden rules, predictable moves, and familiar payoffs. To understand this, we need to start with the concept of ego states. A key idea from transactional analysis, a psychological framework developed in the mid 20th century. An ego state is defined as a coherent system of feeling accompanied by a related set of behavioral patterns, such as changes in posture, viewpoint, voice, vocabulary, and other aspects of behavior. In other words, it's a specific way of feeling, thinking, and acting. According to this theory, people shift between three basic ego states. Ego states that copy what we saw in parental figures, ego states that focus on logic, problem solving, and reality, and finally, ego states that hold emotions and behaviors from early childhood. In simple terms, these are called parent, adult, and child ego states. The parent is where we store rules, values, and judgments that we've absorbed growing up. Many of these are accepted without questioning. It's like a recording of authority figures in our heads, parents, teachers, religious leaders, and society at large. The parent can be either a nurturing or a critical subtype. The nurturing parent is expressed through supportive and caring messages, like take care of yourself, you deserve rest, or let me help you. The critical voice, on the other hand, the critical parent, is characterized by judgment, restriction, and punitive messages. Things like, you should be ashamed of yourself, or you're not good enough, or you're such a disappointment. What will people think of you? This voice induces negative emotions such as shame, guilt, and fear. So these internal messages, the parental introjects, as they're called, shape the way we talk to ourselves. The problem, and this can be a really big problem sometimes, is that they don't always feel like messages that we've absorbed from others, from our caregivers. They feel like our own thoughts. We don't question them and just accept them at face value. And when these voices are harsh, they can cause deep emotional distress. This is actually one of the most powerful psychological illusions. We mistake these absorbed judgments for our real inner voice. Next, there's the adult ego states. The adult is the rational part of us that sees the world clearly. It's our reality testing function. It focuses on facts and logic, and unlike both the parent and the child, which rely on past experiences, the adult makes choices based on what's happening right now. The adult also mediates between the other two states, balancing the rigid rules of the parent and the emotional impulsivity of the child. The child ego state is the emotional, instinctual part of us. It's the seat of our creativity and spontaneity, but also our deep fears, unmet needs, trauma wounds, and childhood conditioning. Most of the time, the child shows up in its adapted form, meaning as the child that learned to change its behavior to fit what the parents expected. And sometimes this means suppressing real feelings in favor of compliance, like playing nice or rebelling and acting out. But there's also the natural child, the playful, curious, and expressive part of us. It only comes out when we feel emotionally safe. Because the child, by definition, is vulnerable, it usually stays hidden in day-to-day life. But in private moments and close relationships, this ego state comes forward, and that's when psychological games begin. So, what are psychological games? They're defined as structured patterns of interaction with hidden motives aimed at getting an emotional payoff. Or to put it more simply, a game is a series of moves with a trap. Games start from the child ego state, and when direct emotional needs feel too risky, the child creates situations where those needs can be met indirectly without openly showing vulnerability. If you stayed with me this far, I hope you're finding this content valuable, so please take a second to hit the like button and subscribe. This helps my mission to create free quality content to help others live more fulfilling lives. So by definition, games are dishonest. They rely on ulterior transactions, meaning two ego states are operating all at once. One of the transactions happens at the social level, at the visible level. It's what's being said out loud. And the other transaction happens at the psychological level, the hidden messages beneath the surface. This is what makes games so powerful. The people playing them believe the surface story, but the real action is happening underneath, and we're often unconscious of it. Games continue because they offer 5 psychological benefits. They fulfill an emotional need, they reinforce our identity, they get predictable reactions from others, they create a structured way to interact, which reduces our anxiety, and last, they maintain social roles and relationships. So this is why people keep playing even when the games hurt them, because the game brings a kind of stability and homeostasis and reinforces the life script that the person unconsciously wants to enact. I want to make this concrete with some examples, so let me start with one destructive game that you've probably run into. It's called Alcoholic. It's a striking example of how a game can be played for a lifetime through a network of mutually reinforcing roles. At a first glance, the game seems simple. Someone drinks excessively, their partner criticizes them, a parent comes to the rescue, and the bartender keeps pouring. But here's the twist. The drinking isn't the point of the game. The hangover is. For the alcoholic, the real payoff is not the pleasure of drinking, though this can certainly deliver secondary pleasure, but it's actually in the aftermath. The self-recrimination, the social condemnation, the pity, the familiar cycle of guilt and shame. This masochistic, sadistic game has a predictable structure and in its full form calls for a cast of 5 characters. It's helpful to think of these as roles in a theater play, with the main character being the casting director too. So the alcoholic makes the first move. He drinks in excess, setting the stage for the cycle of guilt and punishment. The persecutor, in turn, usually a spouse, a boss, authority figure, criticizes the alcoholic, reinforcing their feeling of failure and self-loathing. There's also the rescuer who comes onto the stage. The rescuer intervenes, offering support, encouragement, or resources. This role is usually played by a friend, a doctor, or an Alcoholics Anonymous fellow, but I hope you can easily see how even a spouse could play double time, 2 roles, acting in the rescuer role at night, helping the inebriated husband undress and get to bed, and then playing the persecutor next morning, excoriating him for getting drunk again. The full cast also includes 2 auxiliary roles, the dummy and the connection. The dummy is the enabler type, often the alcoholic's permissive parent or a close relative. They turn a blind eye to the problem and offer financial or emotional support, reinforcing the destructive habit by shielding the alcoholic from the true consequences. And finally, the connection is a real pro at the game, usually a bartender, supplier, or fellow addict. They provide the alcohol, greasing the wheel of the game. It's critical to understand alcoholic as the lead role in a structured game, not merely a condition of substance dependence. This means that someone who's sobered up or who doesn't even drink can still play dry alcoholic, the same game without the bottle. They may replace the alcohol with financial self-sabotage, with promiscuity, gambling, or other forms of compulsive behavior that essentially serve the same psychological function, eliciting criticism, punishment, and validation of the protagonist's internalized, self-destructive life script, aided by a willing, supporting cast. The emotional payoff, self-castigation, outweighs any external consequence. This is what makes such games so difficult to break. Let's take another example. Another destructive game that often goes hand in hand with alcoholic is called wooden leg. At face value, you may hear something that sounds like an explanation. Well, what do you expect from a man who comes from a broken home? Or, I grew up poor, of course I'm not successful. At the social level, these may be statements of fact, but at the psychological level, they could be moves in a game to create an excuse for not trying, a way to get sympathy while avoiding responsibility. And just like alcoholic, this game attracts the perfect counterpart, the savior type who needs to be needed. Such saviors often play a parallel symbiotic game called I'm only trying to help you. They act supportive, while their own hidden payoff depends on ensuring that the person with the perceived disability stays stuck. I hope you're starting to see how complex and pervasive games can be. So the natural question is, how do you break the cycle? It's actually easier than you think. Games only work if everyone sticks to their role. The moment one person refuses to play, the whole thing collapses. Imagine you're watching the game as a play in a theater. So what happens if one of the actors suddenly does something completely out of character on the stage? Well, the entire play stops in its tracks. Though bear in mind that the rest of the actors will probably get really upset because they can't keep playing their roles. Disrupting the expected payoff is called the antithesis. In alcoholic, the game ends when the rescuer stops rescuing, when the persecutor stops punishing, and the dummy stops enabling. The alcoholic, expecting the usual reactions, is left only with themselves to face. In wooden leg, the pattern breaks when someone asks, maybe you do have challenges, but what are you going to do about it? Without the expected response, the excuse loses its power. And this brings me to the final, most important insight. If games are structured ways of controlling outcomes, then the absence of games is the only path to intimacy, to human interactions that are direct, unfiltered, and emotionally honest. But intimacy requires something that games protect us from: vulnerability. Games allow us to engage while maintaining control. And intimacy requires letting go of expectations and stepping into the unknown. So, how can you apply these insights? Here are a few key takeaways to begin seeing structure beneath the surface of social interactions. Start noticing your own ego states. When you interact, ask yourself, am I speaking from my parent, adult, or child state? Is my reaction based on present reality or past conditioning? Also, start noticing the switches between ego states in the people you're dealing with. Recognizing this can immediately deepen your understanding of an interaction. Next, when you see a recurring pattern in your relationships, dig deeper. Is this interaction part of a game? And if it is, what is my role in it? What are the expected responses for each of the players? Who benefits from the dynamic staying the same? Finally, experiment with breaking the cycle. You can expose the dishonest maneuvers by changing your habitual response and subverting the payoff. Stepping outside games isn't just about avoiding manipulation, it's about making room for true connection. And that's the real challenge. Can you step into a conversation without trying to control the outcome? Can you sit with discomfort instead of reaching for a familiar role? Can you allow yourself to be seen without wearing a mask? In the end, intimacy is the only type of interaction that fully satisfies our emotional needs. But paradoxically, it's also rare. True intimacy, particularly when intense, can be psychologically overwhelming or even impossible for many people. Even when we achieve it, it happens in private moments. So the bulk of our meaningful social interactions take the form of games. While games are not as profound as intimacy, they still fulfill essential human needs. So it's to your advantage to understand, navigate, and master them. So what do you think? Does this fit with your own experience? Feel free to drop a comment below and stay tuned for the next video.